Officers laugh at a homeless veteran. Seconds later, the general salutes him silently. They laughed. 3 officers in clean, pressed uniforms, standing at the edge of the precinct steps, chuckling openly, unfiltered, as the man shuffled past. His coat was ripped at the shoulder, the fabric stained with oil and street dust. His boots, once military issue, now scuffed and cracked, dragged heavily on the sidewalk. One of the officers mimicked the man's limp. Another covered his nose theatrically, pretending the veteran's presence alone had tainted the air. But the old man said nothing. He didn't stop, didn't raise a hand or a word. He only paused when a gust of wind rattled the flag above the entrance, and for a brief second, he looked up at it. His lips moved. No sound came out. Then, just as quickly, he lowered his head and kept walking. That was the moment everything changed. A black SUV, tinted windows, quiet engine, pulled up across the street. The door opened. A tall man in a long coat stepped out, walked directly across traffic without looking. He moved with purpose, not urgency. And when he reached the sidewalk, he stopped. Then, in complete silence, he raised his hand to his brow and saluted. Not a casual wave. Not a nod. A full, formal salute. The officers who were laughing just seconds ago went silent. One of them dropped his coffee. The other took an instinctive step back. Because the man standing there wasn't just anyone. He was General Leonard Halvorsen. For stars. Retired commander of the 82nd Airborne. The veteran stopped walking. He turned, slowly, his hands trembling slightly from cold, or age, or something deeper. His face didn't register recognition, but the salute made him straighten, almost unconsciously. His eyes watered. He tried to return the gesture, but his arm couldn't quite make it all the way up. That didn't matter. The general didn't move. He kept the salute steady, crisp, and true. The moment hung in the air like mist before a storm. What had the officers just done? Who had they just laughed at? And who was this man whose presence could stop a general in his tracks? Before we go further, let me say this. You're watching Cracks of Light. A space where we don't look away from pain. Where we sit with it. Understand it. And maybe, just maybe, help it find light again. If stories like this move you, help us bring more voices to the surface. Subscribe. Share. Let's keep telling what others forget. Back to the street. Back to the moment no one expected. See, it wasn't just a salute. It was an apology. A quiet recognition that somewhere along the way, someone had been abandoned. Not by one person, but by a system. By a country. By time. The veteran didn't speak. He didn't need to. His silence said everything. He turned again, his boots dragging forward, each step a soft echo of years that no longer returned his calls. But now, a question started to rise, not just in the minds of those officers, but in ours. Who was he? Why did the general honor him so deeply? And why, when the general lowered his hand, did he look ashamed? Later that day, when the sun dipped behind the old courthouse and the streets took on that dull amber of early winter evenings, a janitor at a nearby diner picked up a wallet someone had dropped under a bench. It was cracked, old, and barely held together by tape. Inside, there was no cash. Just a worn military ID, 2 faded photos, and a single letter folded down to the size of a matchbox. The name on the ID read, Marcus J. Keller. Rank, Sergeant. Unit, 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines. Retired. The waitress turned the wallet into the night manager, who called it into the precinct. One of the same officers who had laughed earlier came to collect it. He looked at the name, then looked at the floor. Because even he recognized it now. Once upon a time, Marcus Keller wasn't just another face on the sidewalk. He had command, courage, brothers in arms. He had once dragged 2 wounded teammates across an active minefield under heavy fire in Ramadi. There was even a medal, though no one had seen him wear it in years. He had buried friends, been thanked by presidents. And then, somewhere between the war and the years that followed, life forgot him. Or maybe you tried to forget life first. Before the man you saw today walked these streets, long before he became the figure hunched against the wind, Marcus was a husband, a father. He had a small house with green shutters and a dog named Bandit that used to bark every time the mail came. His wife, Eliza, taught music at the local elementary school. Their daughter, Rachel, had curls like the leaves in October. But one night, there was a car, a phone call, and the sound that comes after a doorbell rings at midnight, the kind that breaks a man in half. Eliza and Rachel, both gone. A drunk driver. No witnesses. No chance to say goodbye. Marcus held on for a while. Tried to find rhythm and routine. He went back to the base. Tried desk duty. But nothing made sense anymore. The silence in the house was too loud. The smell of her perfume on his pillow too cruel. Eventually, he packed a small bag, left the rest behind, and walked away. From the house. From the metals. From the memories. He became one of many. A shadow at the edge of the crosswalk. A quiet man in the park feeding birds from crust of yesterday's bread. Sometimes, he'd sit outside the VA office, never asking for anything. Just sitting. Watching. Listening to voices that weren't there. People passed him daily. Some looked. Most didn't. And slowly, Marcus became less of a person and more of a fixture. Like a cracked step you stopped noticing after walking it enough times. Until that morning. Until the officers laughed. Until the general arrived. What they didn't know, what none of us could have guessed, was that General Halvorsen had once served with Marcus. Not directly, but close enough. He knew the name. Had read the report. Had seen the letter Eliza wrote to the Department of Defense after Marcus went missing from his last listed address. It wasn't a resignation. It was a vanishing. That's why Halvorsen stopped that day. Why he saluted. Because in that one fragile, forgotten man, he saw a story left unfinished. A loyalty unanswered. A promise broken. And that's where we begin. Not with glory. Not with victory. But with loss. With pain. And with the faint, flickering light that still tries to shine through even the darkest cracks. We're not here to judge. We're here to witness. To remember. And to follow Marcus, not just where he's been, but where he might still go. Because something is coming. Something none of them see yet. A twist no one expects. But first, the silence before the storm. The quiet before the reckoning. And the truth that no man who once stood for his country should have to stand alone. That night, the city pressed down like a weight, the kind that doesn't crush you all at once but slowly, over years, until you forget what it ever felt like to stand tall. Marcus found a spot near the back entrance of a closed hardware store, the same place he'd slept on and off for months. The concrete was cold but dry. He sat with his back against the wall, pulled the worn jacket tighter around him, and closed his eyes. He wasn't asleep, not really. Men like Marcus didn't sleep so much as drift between memories and noise, always one sound away from waking fully. He held the same letter in his pocket that had been folded inside the wallet. It was the last thing Rachel had ever written to him. A school assignment, crayon drawings in the margins. She'd written, "I love you, Daddy," 3 times, underlined each one with shaky hands. That letter had survived fires, storms, time. It hadn't just stayed with him. It had become him. Somewhere across the city, in a well-lit office lined with medals and plaques, General Halvorsen sat at a desk, eyes fixed on an old photograph. The frame was cracked at the corner. In it, 5 young men stood side by side, muddy, tired, but smiling. Marcus was one of them. Not front and center, but there, on the edge, one arm around a fallen comrade's shoulders, the other gripping the edge of his helmet. The photo was taken moments after they'd been pulled out of a fire zone in Fallujah. Halvorsen didn't keep many photos on his desk. That one never left. He picked up the phone. His voice was low but sharp. He called in a favor. Then another. He requested old personnel files, deployments, psychiatric records, a VA benefits log. He had the authority to ask. More importantly, he had the urgency of a man who had looked someone in the eye and realized he'd failed them. Not recently. Years ago. And the guilt had been slow, like frost inching across a window. But now, it was a storm. Meanwhile, Marcus sat alone. A siren moaned in the distance. A dog barked twice, then stopped. Somewhere, a man shouted at no one. Just another night. Just another invisible person under a city too busy to care. He took out the letter, unfolded it carefully, the creases worn soft from use. He didn't read it. He didn't have to. Every word lived in him. Every misspelled sentence, every heart drawn in a child's hand. His thumb brushed the page. Then he closed his eyes again. At the same time, back in the precinct where the laughter had first echoed, the young officer, the one who had dropped his coffee, stood alone by his locker. He hadn't spoken all day. Not to the others. Not to himself. The weight of what he'd done sat heavy on his chest. He remembered Marcus's face. Not the dirt, or the rips, or the fatigue, but the stillness. The silence. The kind of silence that didn't beg or explain. The kind that just existed. And somehow made him feel small. He reached into his bag, pulled out the veteran's ID card. He'd kept it. Told the sergeant he'd deliver it personally. It wasn't his job. But something in him needed to. Outside, rain began to fall. Light at first. Then heavier. Marcus didn't move. He'd learned long ago that shelter was a luxury. What he had was habit. He curled tighter, jacket over his head, and waited for the night to pass like so many others. But something had shifted. A camera, high up on the corner of the hardware store roof, had caught the moment. Earlier that day, the salute, the tears, the way the general had looked at Marcus. It had been forwarded to a local reporter, then to a network producer. It hadn't aired. Not yet. But it was waiting. Ready. One click away from being seen. Still, Marcus knew none of that. He knew only the rain, and the cold, and the growing ache in his chest that he no longer feared. Pain, he could handle. It was the forgetting that hurt more. The way people passed him without flinching. The way he could stand beside a bus stop and still not be seen. But not everyone was blind. A young woman named Liza, who ran the night shift at the soup kitchen 3 blocks away, had seen him once during a storm. She'd offered a poncho. He refused. But she remembered his eyes. Not sad. Not angry. Just waiting. Since then, she'd kept an extra blanket in her car, just in case she saw him again. That night, as she drove home, she passed the alley. The light caught something, a flash of silver near the corner where the garbage can stood. She stopped, reversed, rolled down the window. And there he was, curled like a question mark, barely moving. She got out. "Sir," she said. No response. She approached slowly, placed the blanket beside him. Still nothing. Then she crouched, almost whispered, "Do you remember me?" His eyes opened, slowly. He blinked against the rain. Then he nodded. Just once. She didn't press. Just left the blanket and walked away. But as she got back in her car, she noticed something odd. A black sedan parked across the street. No headlights. Engine off. But someone inside. Watching. She felt a chill that had nothing to do with the rain. Inside the car sat General Halvorsen. Hands folded. Eyes fixed. He wasn't stalking. He was witnessing. Taking in the full cost of years lost, of wars fought not just abroad but inside. His assistant had begged him not to come. Said it was risky. But Halvorsen had insisted. Some debts couldn't be repaid through distance. He needed to see. Needed to understand. And in that moment, across rain and silence and everything left unsaid, Marcus raised his head, looked directly at the car, and nodded again. No anger. No shock. Just recognition. As if to say, I know what you carry too. And somehow, I forgive you. That was the first crack. The first quiet moment where something began to shift. Where one man's past started to reach toward a future he never believed was still waiting for him. But before anything could change, the city had more tests to give. More humiliations. More small cruelties. Because the world does not turn kind overnight. And Marcus, though seen once, would have to walk through many more shadows before the light finally found him again. 2 mornings later, the sky broke open without warning. Rain slammed against the sidewalk in sheets, and the air felt like it hadn't moved in hours. Marcus stood in front of a shelter he used to visit every few weeks when the cold became unbearable. Today, he didn't make it inside. A volunteer with a clipboard stopped him at the door. She looked him up and down, then shook her head. "We're full," she said, her voice sharp, flat. He didn't argue. He didn't ask to check. He turned and walked back into the storm. The truth was, he could smell the warmth inside. He could hear the chatter, the clinking of bowls, the hum of a working heater. But to the woman with the clipboard, he wasn't someone worth bending the rules for. Just another soaked, shivering man in a city with too many of them. He walked until the pain in his knees turned sharp, until the puddles soaked through his boots and socks and made every step feel like carrying stone. He found a spot under the bridge, one he hadn't used in years. There was a mattress there once, and a man named Jonah who used to talk in his sleep about a daughter he hadn't seen since she was 6. The mattress was gone now. Jonah too. Only an old crate remained, half burned on one side, probably used for fire by someone who needed it worse. Marcus sat down on the concrete, leaned against the cold metal beam, and looked at his hands. They shook more these days. Not from fear. Just age. Or cold. Or whatever lives in the bones after decades of holding grief too long. From the bridge, he watched people pass on the sidewalk above. Some held umbrellas. Others just pulled their collars tighter. No one looked down. No one saw him. Except for one. A boy. 12 maybe. Holding his mother's hand. Bright blue hoodie. Mismatched shoes. He looked down through the cracks in the railing, straight into Marcus's eyes. He didn't look away. Not right away. Just stared. A kind of quiet gaze that children have before the world teaches them to pretend they don't see suffering. The mother tugged his arm, and he disappeared from view. Later that afternoon, Marcus tried to find food. The mission was closed for cleaning. A diner he used to scavenge from had a new manager who warned him not to linger. Health inspectors are cracking down, she said. He nodded. Left. By dusk, his stomach hurt with the kind of hunger that doesn't growl but hums, a dull weight pressing from the inside out. He sat on the edge of a planter box near the courthouse. The same place he once stood with Eliza after their wedding, when they had taken a photo in matching navy dress and uniform. He closed his eyes. Tried not to remember. Across the street, in a clean white office lined with quiet, the young officer who had laughed at Marcus that day now sat at a desk with a stack of paperwork. His name was Drew. 27. 2 years on the force. He couldn't sleep the night after the salute. Something about it gnawed at him. He'd replayed the moment in his head 100 times. The laugh. The look. The way the general had stood still, saluting a man Drew had mocked seconds earlier. He told no one. But he hadn't been the same. Today, he ran the ID Marcus had dropped again. Tried to find more records. Something. Anything. But the system said inactive. That was it. No address. No status. No benefits claimed. Just gone. Drew sat back. The guilt didn't fade. It grew. Marcus, meanwhile, had started to cough. A slow, low cough that echoed in his ribs. The kind that didn't leave. Rainwater from his soaked jacket dripped down his sleeves, cold against his skin. He shifted his weight, felt the letter in his pocket press against his ribs. The same one from Rachel. Always Rachel. He took it out, but his hand shook too much to unfold it. His vision blurred. He blinked. Tried again. Gave up. He put it back. A woman walked by then. Designer bag, heels clicking, talking into a phone about some meeting running late. She glanced at him once. Then again. Her eyes narrowed. She crossed to the other side of the sidewalk. Didn't look back. Marcus stood up, forced himself to walk. Somewhere. Anywhere. A security guard outside a bank lobby shook his head when Marcus approached for cover. Not here, he said. No malice, just routine. Marcus didn't argue. Again, he turned and left. He always turned and left. There was no fight in him. Not anymore. That night, something inside broke. Not all at once. Just a slow bend that finally gave out. Marcus sat under a bus shelter, shivering, lips pressed together so tightly they turned white. He pulled his coat tighter, but it was soaked through. And then it happened. His body just gave out. He slumped to the side, not unconscious, not awake. Somewhere in between. Rain pooled around him. People walked by. A few glanced. No one stopped. Across the street, a camera blinked. A traffic cam. It had seen it all. Stored it. Logged it. And one man had access to that feed. General Halvorsen. He'd been checking periodically, not expecting much. But when he saw Marcus collapse, his hand went to the phone again. Not to a friend. Not to a subordinate. This time to someone else entirely. Liza. The woman from the soup kitchen. He'd found her name in a report filed by a volunteer who mentioned giving a blanket to a man outside the old hardware store. He called her. Asked her to check. She didn't ask why. Just grabbed her keys and went. When she arrived, Marcus was still there. Barely sitting. Barely conscious. She knelt beside him, tried to get him to speak. He didn't. She called for an ambulance. Held his hand until it came. Her fingers gripped his like she was anchoring him to this world. She didn't know his story. Didn't need to. His silence was enough. They loaded him in gently. The EMT checked his pulse, looked up and nodded. He's alive, she said. But barely. The doors closed. Liza stood in the rain long after the taillights disappeared. At the hospital, they found the letter in his pocket. The ID. The name. The nurse assigned to him set it aside in a file. But she paused before she left the room. Something about the way he clutched it in his sleep, even now, made her feel something she didn't fully understand. She whispered, "You're safe now," though she didn't know if he could hear. Across town, Halvorsen closed his laptop. Sat in the dark. A man who had led battalions, faced mortar fire, written speeches for Congress, and now found himself completely still, hands clenched in silence. He whispered Marcus's name like a prayer. Morning came soft and gray, and for the first time in years, Marcus Keller opened his eyes not to a wet sidewalk or the sound of honking cars, but to the quiet hum of machines and the scent of antiseptic. A warm blanket covered his chest, unfamiliar yet comforting. The ceiling was a soft beige. The bed under him firm. It took a few seconds for him to understand where he was. A nurse entered gently, carrying a chart and a paper cup of water. She didn't speak right away. Just smiled. "Good morning," she said quietly. Marcus tried to respond, but his throat cracked from disuse. She brought the water closer. He sipped, swallowed, closed his eyes. For a moment, he forgot the years he had spent invisible, just breathing in warmth, sterile air, and kindness he hadn't expected. When he opened his eyes again, the nurse was gone, replaced by another figure, a man in a dark coat, silver hair, shoulders square. General Halvorsen stood silently near the door. No guards, no cameras, just him and Marcus. He didn't speak at first, just looked. Then, quietly, he approached the bed, pulled a chair close, and sat down. "You don't remember me," Halvorsen said softly, not as a question, just a truth. Marcus blinked, then nodded once. "I remember your name," the general added, voice nearly breaking. "I remember what you did in Ramadi. In 2006. You pulled out Corporal Dennis and Lieutenant Park. The mines were still active. No cover. You didn't wait. You just moved." Marcus looked away. The ceiling again. As if those memories had grown too heavy to meet face to face. "They lived because of you," Halvorsen continued. "You never took credit. Never stayed for the medal ceremony. They told me you were grieving. That you'd lost your family not long after." Marcus closed his eyes. A tear traced slowly down his temple. "I didn't forget you," Halvorsen said, his voice a whisper now. "But I think the world did. And that's on me. That's on all of us." For the first time in the conversation, Marcus tried to speak. His voice was rough, barely there. "They didn't ask me to stay," he said. The general sat quietly with that. "We failed you," he said. "And now I want to make it right. If you'll let me." Marcus didn't respond. He just turned his head to the side, facing the window, where light was beginning to pour in. But he didn't say no. That same day, the footage of the salute went public. The security cam clip, just under a minute long, was posted by a local news reporter. It spread in hours. 3 officers laughing. A homeless man limping past. A general stepping into frame, saluting without a word. Then the silence. Then the shame. Thousands of comments. Then tens of thousands. People asking, who is this man? Who is he really? And why did that moment feel like it cracked something open inside all of us? Media outlets reached out. The precinct refused interviews. One of the officers, Drew, resigned quietly the same afternoon. He left behind a note. "We were wrong. He deserved more. I'm sorry." That was it. At the hospital, a nurse brought Marcus a new change of clothes. Not because he asked. Because she wanted to. Clean, soft, simple. A pair of boots arrived too. Polished. Fitted. Sent anonymously, but the handwriting on the note was unmistakable. "One step at a time. LH." Marcus held the note like a relic. Not because of the name. Because of the gesture. Liza visited again later that night. She brought him tea. Sat beside him, not as a volunteer, not as a savior. Just as someone who'd been watching too long from the sidelines and finally decided to step in. "I saw you once with a sandwich," she said. "You gave it to a kid who had dropped his. You didn't say anything. Just handed it to him and walked away." Marcus looked down at the cup in his hands. "He was hungry," he said. "So was I. But he was smaller." Liza didn't smile. Just nodded. Then said, "People don't know. But we see more than they think." Marcus's eyes softened. "You're one of the kind ones," he said, barely audible. She looked at him then. Not like a patient. Not like a mystery. Just a man. And said, "So are you." By the following week, the story had reached state news. Then national. Marcus still hadn't spoken to any reporters. But the world had started to speak for him. Letters came. Dozens. Then boxes. Former Marines. Families. Strangers. They wrote of brothers who were lost. Of fathers who disappeared into the streets after the war. Of the men they had passed without looking and would never do that again. One package contained a single medal. No note. Just a bronze star in a velvet box and a photo. On the back, a message in sharp ink. He never got his. Maybe this one can stand in. The board at the VA hospital convened an emergency session. His case was reopened. Benefits reinstated. Records corrected. A spokesperson issued a formal apology. But Marcus didn't ask for that. He didn't even attend the meeting. He sat instead at the window of his hospital room, watching the rain roll down the glass like time running backward. The nurse brought him the forms to sign. He signed them all. Then set the pen down and asked, "Can I walk outside tomorrow?" The next day, Marcus stepped into sunlight for the first time in months. Not on a sidewalk. Not under a bridge. But on a small patio outside the hospital's recovery wing. He stood quietly, hands in his coat pockets. A man approached. Not in uniform. Just a long gray coat, slacks, a worn leather notebook in hand. He stopped a few feet away. "I'm the one who released the footage," he said. "I hope that was okay." Marcus didn't answer right away. Then he looked up. "People forget fast," he said. "Maybe now they'll remember a little longer." The man nodded. "They already are." Meanwhile, in the diner where Marcus had once been refused water, where he used to sit near the back and wait for leftovers, a new sign was posted by the front door. "Veterans eat free. Always." The manager was new, but she'd seen the footage. And more than that, she'd heard the story. From a customer. From the mailman. From her own father, who served in Nam. "We forgot him once," she said to her staff. "Let's not do it again." Even the precinct changed. Quietly, without announcement. Officer Drew's resignation sparked a review. Mandatory training. New outreach. But more than policy, a photo now sat framed near the entrance. A still from the camera. Marcus standing. The general saluting. No caption. No label. Just that frozen second of truth. Every officer who walked in passed it. And through all this, Marcus said little. He accepted a small apartment offered by the VA. Not large. Not flashy. Just enough. He asked for one thing only. That it face east. "I want to see the sun in the morning," he said. That was all. General Halvorsen visited once more before deployment to a diplomatic mission overseas. He handed Marcus a letter. "It's from Park," he said. "One of the men you saved. He's alive. Has 2 kids now. Wanted you to know." Marcus didn't open it then. Just held it tight to his chest. The general saluted again. This time, Marcus returned it. Full. Steady. Their hands dropped in unison. Then Halvorsen left. And Marcus stood alone. In the sun. With the letter. And for the first time in a long time, his shoulders rose. Not from burden, but from breath. From being seen. From being whole. A month passed quietly, and for the first time in years, Marcus Keller had a routine. He woke early, always before sunrise, brewed a small cup of coffee on the old stove in his apartment, then sat by the window and watched the light stretch across the rooftops. The east-facing unit filled with warmth by 6 a.m., and he would just sit there, breathing in the newness of each morning. He didn't talk much, not even to himself. But the silence no longer hurt. It had become a kind of music. Each morning, he folded his blanket, placed the photograph of Eliza and Rachel back in its wooden frame, and set it gently on the windowsill. Some days, he would walk to the park. Others, he'd visit the center where he'd begun volunteering once a week. The very same place that had turned him away so many times before. The new director welcomed him in without hesitation. Word had spread, not just about what had happened, but who he was. Not the viral clip, not the image of the salute, but the man who never asked for attention. The man who gave away a sandwich to a hungry child. The man who once pulled friends from fire and walked through years of loneliness without ever once asking why him. Now, Marcus moved slower, but with purpose. On Wednesdays, he helped sort clothes. On Fridays, he swept the floors. He never said much to the others. But when he did speak, people listened. His words were spare, but carried the weight of someone who had walked further than most ever would. A young woman named Jada, who came to the center with her 2 kids, would often sit with him while he folded coats. She'd ask questions. He'd answer with stories. Not of war, but of laughter. Of his daughter pretending to be a lion under the kitchen table. Of his wife trying to bake a pie without ever reading the recipe. Small things, but real. Jada once said, "You talk like everything mattered." And Marcus smiled. Because it did. Outside the center, the world had not stopped. People were still busy. Still loud. Still rushing past stories like his without pause. But change had started to take root, even in the smallest ways. At the diner, a photo of Marcus and the general now hung quietly near the register. Beneath it, a jar with a note. For those who've been forgotten. Patrons added what they could. The jar never emptied. On one quiet afternoon, the woman who once turned Marcus away at the door, who had looked him up and down like he didn't belong, returned. She didn't come to eat. She came to wait. And when Marcus walked in, she stood up, approached him slowly, and handed him a small envelope. "You left this once," she said. He took it. Inside was a handkerchief. Clean. Pressed. And a note. "I see you now. I'm sorry it took so long." Marcus didn't say much. He nodded. And for her, that was enough. The city never offered formal apologies. There were no parades, no plaques. But people began to move differently. A man gave up his seat at the clinic when Marcus entered. A teenager crossed the street to offer him a bottle of water on a hot day. A postal worker left a note on his door. My father served too. Thank you. But what mattered most to Marcus was not what others now did for him. It was what he could still do for others. 3 days a week, he returned to the place he once called a last resort. The shelter. This time, as a volunteer. He kept the books, sorted the mail, handed out socks, offered hot coffee with a steady hand and a kind glance. He knew each face that walked in. Knew the look of a man who hadn't slept well in months. Knew when to ask, and when to just sit quietly beside someone and let the silence do the work. He never told anyone about the night he almost didn't make it. The night the rain soaked through his coat and made even breathing feel like too much effort. But every time he handed a blanket to someone else, his fingers tightened just slightly. He remembered, and he made sure no one ever went unhurt again. Then one afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the buildings and the streets took on that golden hue of late fall, something unexpected happened. A young man entered the shelter. Clean shirt, nervous eyes, holding a letter in his hand. Marcus was behind the desk. The man approached slowly. Are you Marcus Keller? He asked. Marcus nodded once. The young man looked down, then offered the letter. My mother asked me to give this to you. She said you gave her food once when she had nothing. I think I was there too. In a stroller. Marcus opened the envelope. Inside was a photo. A toddler, maybe 2 years old, being held by a woman in a raincoat. In the background, barely visible, was Marcus, older, tired, but unmistakable. He remembered the day. He remembered the rain. He remembered her crying and him just placing the sandwich in her hand and walking away. She said you saved her life, the young man whispered. Marcus looked up, eyes shining, but he didn't cry, just placed a hand on the young man's shoulder. Tell her, he said, I remember her smile. Later that night, as the shelter began to close and the volunteers packed up the last of the bread and blankets, Marcus stood by the door. A woman approached, middle-aged, familiar eyes. She introduced herself as an administrator at the local school. I heard what you've done. I was wondering if you'd consider talking to some of our students. They've seen the video, but they don't know the man. They'd like to. Marcus hesitated. Then, after a pause, said, only if I can listen to. The next week, he sat in a small classroom filled with curious faces. Some whispered. Some stared. One girl raised her hand. Were you a hero? She asked. Marcus looked down, then replied, no. I just kept going. From then on, Marcus became something he never expected. Not a celebrity, not a symbol, but a reference point, a reminder. People didn't ask for selfies. They asked for stories, or silence, or a handshake. And that, to him, meant more than medals. And every evening, he returned home to the east-facing apartment, took the picture of Eliza and Rachel from the windowsill, whispered goodnight, and turned out the light. Peaceful, present, and whole in a way the world almost took from him, but didn't. Because somehow, through pain, silence, and a single unexpected salute, he had found his way back. Not just to the city, but to himself. The sun was soft that morning, resting low over the rooftops like it didn't want to wake the city too fast. Marcus Keller sat on the same wooden bench outside his building, a quiet ritual he had come to cherish. The small garden beside it had started to bloom again. A few bright yellow daisies poked out from the soil, planted weeks earlier by the children from the shelter's after-school program. One of them, a girl with wide eyes and skin knees, had named them after planets. Marcus never asked why. She had simply said, because stars come from dark places too. He had smiled then, not with his mouth, but in that quiet way his eyes softened when he didn't want the world to see how deeply something moved him. That morning, he watched a mother cross the street holding her son's hand. They both waved when they saw him. The boy ran ahead, stopped in front of Marcus, and held up a drawing. Crayon on folded paper. A stick figure in a brown coat. Saluting. Next to it, another figure, smiling, reaching out. That's you, the boy said proudly. And that's me. Marcus took the drawing with both hands. He didn't speak. He only reached into his pocket, pulled out a small wrapped candy, and gave it to the boy, who grinned and ran back to his mother. They disappeared around the corner, but Marcus stayed there a while longer, holding the drawing like it was glass. Later that afternoon, he walked to the community center down the street. Inside, a small room had been quietly dedicated to honoring veterans who had served and never spoken about it. No big ceremony. Just a photo wall, some letters, medals donated anonymously. And in the center, a framed picture, black and white, no caption. It was Marcus, sitting on the sidewalk that rainy day, the general saluting him. The photo had no description, but next to it, Someone had left a card, written in a child's hand. Sometimes the strongest people say the least. He stood there a long time, looking at it. Not with pride, not with pain, just with quiet. A man who had been to the edge of forgetting and returned not louder, but lighter. Behind him, a woman walked by with a toddler in her arms. She slowed as she passed, then stopped. "Are you him?" she asked gently. Marcus didn't answer, just gave her a small nod. She smiled. "Thank you," she whispered, then kept walking. No photos, no fanfare, just that. "Thank you." That evening, Marcus returned home, turned on the kettle, and pulled out a small notebook. Inside were letters people had sent him, clippings, a sketch from a student, a thank you card from the young man who brought back the photo of his mother. He flipped through slowly. Each one reminded him that he mattered, that even if the world had forgotten him once, it had remembered just in time. As the light faded, he stepped out onto the balcony. The street below was quiet. A few children still played, their laughter rising like birdsong. A neighbor passed by and looked up, raised a hand. Marcus returned the wave. He didn't speak much to the neighbors, but they had grown used to seeing him. Some called him Sir. Some called him Mr. Keller. Most just nodded, like you would to someone you respected without needing to say why. Inside, the walls of his apartment remained bare, except for one photo. Eliza. Rachel. Framed near the window. He looked at it before bed every night. Tonight, he lit a small candle beneath it. Not for mourning, for memory. Then he sat down, picked up a pen, and started to write. Not a journal, not a letter, just thoughts. A kind of quiet tracing of the life he had once believed was over. He wrote about how people had begun to see again. About the woman who returned his handkerchief. The boy with the crayon drawing. The morning sunlight on his hands. He ended with one line. There is still good in the world, even when it looks away for a while. The next day, he took that paper and folded it neatly. Walked to the center. Slipped it into the small donation box under the photo wall. No one saw. No one needed to. It was enough that it was there. And so, life settled into something gentle. Marcus didn't try to change the world. He just showed up. He handed out soup on cold days. Picked up trash from the sidewalk before anyone asked. Held the door open. Nodded to strangers. Sat in silence with men who thought no one would ever listen to them again. He became, quietly, the person others pointed to and said, "That man, he helped me." And one morning, as he walked slowly through the park, cane in hand now, slower but steady, a young mother passed him with her daughter. The girl stopped, turned, and asked, "Mom, is that the man from the photo?" The mother looked, smiled. "Yes," she said. The girl waved. Marcus waved back. Just a soft, tired hand lifting through the air. But in that gesture, a whole history moved. A lifetime. A journey. A truth. Because Marcus Keller had once been invisible. Forgotten. Lost between the noise of the world and the silence of his grief. But through one moment of salute without words he was seen again. And through that, he gave others permission to be seen too. And so the story didn't end with a parade or a medal or a headline. It ended with a bench. A cup of tea. A smile passed between strangers. A child saying thank you. And a man, once broken, now whole in the most important way. Quietly, completely, and without regret. And so, on a quiet late afternoon, with the wind gently brushing through the dry branches of a small city park, Marcus Keller sat on the same old wooden bench he always did. There was nothing special about the scene. No crowds. No cameras. No reporters. Just him, his worn military coat, and the small notebook he always kept close. A young boy ran past, chasing a ball that had bounced off the sidewalk. Marcus bent down, picked it up, and handed it back. The boy gave a quick, respectful nod. "Thank you, sir," he said softly. Marcus didn't reply with words. Just a simple smile. Sometimes kindness doesn't need to be explained. It just needs to be seen. A young woman walked by, her daughter's hand in hers. She paused when she recognized him and offered a quiet greeting. "My little girl calls you Grandpa in her bedtime stories," she said. Marcus looked up, surprised but moved. He smiled again, that same soft expression that seemed to carry a lifetime of sorrow and peace in equal measure. The late afternoon sun leaned gently across his face, as if to acknowledge a man who had once been forgotten, but never defeated. Inside a nearby community center, a photograph hung silently on the wall. No title, no description, just Marcus holding a child in the rain. No words were needed. People passed by, looked up, and somehow just knew that was the man who had once been ignored by the world, and yet changed it by refusing to let it change him. Not everyone gets to see their story remembered. Not everyone survives long enough to witness their quiet goodness ripple back through the world. But Marcus Keller did. Not because he asked, because he deserved to. And because of him, maybe someone out there will pause longer the next time they see a stranger in need. Maybe someone will reach out instead of looking away. And if that happens, even once, that means he's still here, living in the smallest gestures of those who are learning to be kind again. There are things in life that seem small, like a nod, a returned wallet, or a gentle glance at someone alone. But sometimes, it's those very things that open doors no one expects. Doors that lead home, to connection, to grace. Thank you for staying with us through this story. If your heart felt something, if you believe in the quiet power of goodness, if you want to help us keep finding and sharing the cracks of light in this often dark world, please consider subscribing to Cracks of Light. Leave a comment. Share this story with someone who might need to hear it. Because maybe, just maybe, they are the next Marcus Keller we're all looking for. We don't do this for views. We do it because every forgotten soul out there deserves to be remembered. And if you happen to be in the dark right now, please remember, someone sees you. Someone is waiting for you to keep going. And life is watching. Gently, quietly, but always ready to welcome you back into the light.